Uhuru brothers and sisters and comrades, this is Amali Shatella, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, and I'm leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. I want to really express my appreciation for people coming out on today. As you know, today we're going to talk about something that's really trending, and it is the movie that's out now about Fred Hampton, Judas and the Black Messiah. And so I want to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about it because while the movie did a splendid job in showing the courage of Fred Hampton, who was a revolutionary leader par excellence, and it even suggested something about the strength and power of his wife, Akua Njeri, who was known as Deborah Johnson at the time. And it referenced young Fred Hampton Jr. And I want to say that that was really powerful. It was powerful for you to get an opportunity to meet Akua through the movie, to know about Fred Hampton Jr. and to see, I think, even some pictures of him subsequent to the credits in the movie. And then there's evidence that many people, as a consequence of seeing this movie and hearing about young Fred and hearing about Akua and what it is that they're trying to do to follow up with the life of Fred Hampton, have shown, expressed really a real appreciation and support for that. And that's powerful. And the thing that helped to make this movie significant, of course, is the fact that Akua and Fred Jr. function as consultants for the movie. That lent it a certain element of credibility, and in my view, as it should have, if only because I know of the credibility of Akua and Fred Jr., people who I know and worked with closely at one point. So I wanted to say that, but we're talking about the way it really was. And the way it really was extraordinary. And I see that more Africans, and this would be younger Africans, who are gravitating toward this movie and expressing such profound admiration and appreciation for Fred Hampton Jr. And that is right on. And I know that Fred and Akua had to really be seriously involved in how to navigate this whole process of getting Fred's story told, despite the fact that they didn't write the story. They functioned as consultants, and I know they had something to do with some aspects of what was portrayed. And but what was not portrayed, of course, is much of what happened with Akua and Fred subsequent to the murder of Fred, and the kinds of things that they had to go through. And they went through some serious contradictions, because while everybody can say how lovely Fred was and how much they love Fred Hampton today, and many of them are in Chicago, and some of them had been members of the Black Panther Party, and some with stature. The fact is that after Fred was killed for some time, Akua and Fred had to put up with a lot of contradictions and problems with attitudes and what have you in the community, as could happen after you have this kind of brutal assault, this kind of murder, and all of the media slander and things like that that follow. And then also the fact that some people would have problems with them for fear of the state or any other kinds of reason. But the point I want to make is that Akua and Fred Jr. did not have an easy time, and that they were not ever discouraged or defeated or anything like that. They were remarkable. So let's talk about the way it was. And the problem with the movie, and some people have considered a real problem, that William O'Neill was put forth as a very sympathetic character, and he was. And an aspect of it even put forth his handler, the white guy FBI guy who was his handler, rather sympathetically, in the sense that from time to time he would appear to experience shock and dismay at some of the decisions that was being made coming from J. Edgar Hoover, who was then the executive director of the chief domestic military director of the domestic secret police organization, FBI, in this country. This guy, his handler, would sometimes seem to be dismayed or have problems with some of the things that he was being asked to do, including murder Hampton. And so even that was, some sympathy shown this guy. He really kind of was surprised. You want to do that, and O'Neill. And it's serious that people would have problems with O'Neill, and you should. That so much revolved around O'Neill. And because there are people who will say, well, he was young when it happened, and there are all kinds of conditions and that, around which people betray our struggle and betray our movement, betray our revolution. And there's no excuse for that. We cannot excuse that anybody who knowingly gets involved in that, and then if in fact they may have done so and have a turn of conscience, they have a responsibility to make that known. But that didn't happen with O'Neill. And so the idea that anything would promote sympathy for O'Neill in our community, empathy among the African people, is extremely problematic. Because as what should have been part of what should have been seen, or should have been experienced, or should have been, people should have had some concept of, is that there was a war being made. Certainly against the Panthers, and in many ways against our people, that was not as widely or sharply exposed as this war that was being made against the Black Panther Party. And under those circumstances, when people fighting for freedom, you cannot tolerate or allow any sympathy for forces like that who will betray the revolution. You can't talk about how young he was and misinformed, and how the white FBI agent ends up being like his mentor, or the only family he has, kind of nonsense. Because there are always going to be traitors. And there are always going to be people who betray our revolution. We have to create a standard, a stance inside the African community that's intolerant of anyone who would inform. Even in the African community in general, there's a certain recognition of the relationship that we have with the state, with the government, with the armed component of our oppression that maintains our oppression and exploitation. That's why some liberals and Negroes are always upset, because there's a code, there's a standard in the African community: you don't snitch. But O'Neill was not just a snitch. He's one of those people, who move into your house, the worst kind of rat, moves into your house, eats your food, plays with your children, becomes familiar with your family and this kind of stuff, and then rats us out. This is counterinsurgency. O'Neill was an informant, as the movie shows, of the FBI. So there was real dismay in some quarters by holding up O'Neill in some sympathetic way, and by making much of the movie revolve around O'Neill. I suspect that that may have even been necessary. I suspect that part of what young Fred and Cool had to do, or wanted to do, was to make sure that their husband and father was redeemed. And by which I mean in the African community's eyes, in the public eye, that this man who had been slandered and then murdered and characterized in such odious terms and what have you. So I can see how Fred and Cool would want to have Fred's story told. Let this human being get seen. And so it may be a condition, and I don't know if that's the case or not. It may have been a condition that, that for O'Neill to be a major feature. I remember in 95, when Melvin Van Peebles made the movie Panther, and the kind of things that he had to go through with that movie, and how, even as I understand it, as I heard, that there was a push by the studios to make Huey P. Newton, the character playing Huey P. Newton, be Tom Cruise of all things. And as I understand it, Van Peebles was able to push back on that and to do something quite different. But I went to that movie. I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 1995 when the movie came out. When it first came out, I was there to look after Malcolm X's daughter, who was being put on trial in Minnesota because there was in Minneapolis because they said that she was involved in some kind of plot to kill Farrakhan for what was presumed to have been his relationship in the death of Malcolm. And so they had arrested her. And so I had gone to Minneapolis to organize defense for her and had spoken to groups and things there. And then the Panther movie came out. And what was really extraordinary is when that movie came out, and this was 95, and I went to see the movie. And when I went to the theater, the front of the theater, there were cops lined up on horseback. And I actually had to sidle through the horses in order to get to the movie entrance. And then once in the movie, I had to show ID. So they were so fearful of this movie about the Black Panther Party that it created a near panic in that theater. And of course, Melvin Van Peebles went through a lot promoting the movie and as a consequence of doing that. So this is something about the legacy of the Black Panther Party and what it has meant. And so now we come to this period of time. And we have, and I'm mentioning this too because of the kinds of pressure I know the studio would put on people about certain kinds of movies, especially when they feature us in a decent way, especially when they would feature a Fred Hampton, who was a magnificent warrior for the African community. But the movie had its limitations. And I want to say something about that. They had great actors, splendid actors. It's enough to make you peed off because you go to movies so often or used to, and then you'd see these mediocre forces white people who call themselves actors, and they were able to get away with that because Africans we're not making our own movies, we're not in the movies in such a fashion as we just see now. Now we see these incredible African actors who are defining even the art and craft of acting and movie making. So that was splendid about the movie. The acting was great. And it was good what we were able to see, and the people were able to see about the discipline of young Africans who were there. And it was great to see courageous Fred Hampton, who would do what should be a normal kind of thing in terms of organizing the community, which is different from liking stuff on social media and just participating in social media outings. That's not organizing, never has been organizing. And Fred was an organizer. And Fred saw as an absolute need to organize all of the opponents of colonial capitalism that he could in the Illinois, where he was the deputy chair, and in Chicago in specific. And so for him to walk into the offices of these street organizations, and I think it was the Blackstone Rangers that he really, and Jeff Fort and forces like that they developed a relationship, and FBI, tried to create a situation that they would end up in a bloody shootout. But Fred went in, and he went in and he organized them. He won their unity, etc. And what a great example! He did the same things with the young Puerto Rican organization. He was incredible, and he did the same things with this organization of poor white people who lived in Chicago, many of them from the Appalachians and things like that. So it was good to see an organizer. It was good to see that somebody who recognized the significance of the role of the people in the revolutionary project, not as somebody who we preach to, but people, forces who we organize because we recognize their relationship to the revolutionary project that's going to emancipate everybody, and it has to be headquartered, of course, among the working class. He talked about the proletariat. That was really important for that to be reintroduced into a discussion right now, but it had limitations. And the limitations starts with the fact that what happened to Fred was not contextualized. That, we know something happened with Alex Rackley, and we know Malcolm had been killed, and we know King had been killed, but it wasn't contextualized. So you had no way to connect what happened to Fred and the Black Panther Party in Chicago to what was happening to the Black Revolution of the 60s overall. It's in this context that Fred Hampton was this magnificent figure. Because the truth is that the whole social system at that time, American white power, American capitalism, was experiencing a severe crisis. And this crisis was something that was caused in part by the revolutionary struggles of the people in Vietnam. Cuba had won freedom in 1959, 1960s. We saw revolution happening all over the world. And it was anti-colonial struggle that people were involved in. This is important because if you don't understand that, people can make the mistake of turning Fred Hampton into a simple liberal anti-racist who was just trying to make America better. But he was not just an anti-racist trying to make America better. And despite the fact that a lot of the liberals feel like it's absolutely necessary to say that Fred wasn't violent and unlike that was a lie, it's the problem here, and what most of them say, is that they pander to the liberal notion that armed struggle, self-defense, etc., is a problem. It's not a problem. And the Panthers understood that. That's why they picked up the gun. That's why they had Fred quoting Huey P. Newton. If he wasn't Huey, he was quoting Huey was one who quoted Mao Zedong, having said this, that political power comes from the barrel of the gun. This was something that the Panthers understood quite clearly. And this was something that revolutionaries around the world, this was the conclusion that revolutionaries around the world had come to, people who were fighting against colonialism, most of whom started off just like we did, trying to demonstrate and get the colonizer to give us freedom, to let us live in peace with them and that kind of stuff. And then finally what happens is that the colonized people get driven into an understanding of the need to actually overthrow the relationship that we have to colonialism. That happened globally, everywhere, all around the world. This was happening. So it's problematic. And this is one of the things that made the Black Power movement subsequent to 1966 when SNCC took on the Black Power slogan demand. This was one of the things that made it so significant because it moved the struggle of African people in the United States away from just some kind of civil rights and we want to integrate with the white people kind of a movement, gave it a different character and helped it to achieve the character that was happening of people in Vietnam, Algeria, all these other places, the struggle against colonialism. When you struggle for Black power, when you struggle for power, it's the struggle against colonialism. And the Black Panther Party characterized and defined itself as a struggle against colonialism. So this is what we had happening there. And it wasn't just happening in Chicago. The fact that it was happening all throughout the United States. In 1968 alone, some 300 members of the Black Panther Party were snatched up in raids all around the United States. More than 30 members of the Black Panther Party in 1968 alone were executed, were murdered. And John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General of the United States at the time, had declared that by the end of 1969, they would have destroyed the Black Panther Party, who J. Edgar Hoover had characterized as the most important kind of security threat to the internal security of the United States was the Black Panther Party. So this is the reality that we were looking at. This was what was happening in the world. And Fred Hampton was an important part of that struggle, but it was an overall global struggle against colonialism. And despite the fact that in the film, you have the character playing the role of J. Edgar Hoover, who as asking the question of the FBI agent who's William O'Neill's handler, what he would do when his daughter, who was 8 months old in the movie, what he would do when his daughter brought a Black man, a Negro, home with her. And this was a stunning question for the handler, the agent. And the problem with that, of course, is that the implicit in that whole concept question is that the FBI was, and J. Edgar Hoover was talking about killing, doing something and getting rid of Hampton because he was concerned that black men was going to be coming home with white women. This is how, this is one of the fables that has been put forth to define the struggle of black people historically inside this country, this whole notion of black men and wanting to sleep with white women, and that was the motivating factor. And so this was misleading. And Hoover may have that opinion. And a lot of FBI agents may have that opinion, but that's not what this was about. It was not about the possibility of Fred Hampton or some African man coming home with the daughter of the white FBI agent. It was a war that was being made to overturn, to defeat a struggle of oppressed peoples around the world. Because as Fred was able to say, as the Panthers had been able to discern, that we are struggling against this thing called capitalism. And capitalism is a blood-sucking, vicious kind of social system. And that struggle still goes on, but it's not just a vicious social system. It is a vicious social system that rests upon the foundation of colonialism. So this is how the capitalist system gets started. This is how Europe gets built. This is how America gets built. You know that already, because you know that white people are not indigenous to the land that we call America. White people came here and took this land. And having taken this land, killing the indigenous people and putting many of the rest of them in concentration camps, kidnapping African people and bringing us here, this is the start of capital for capitalism. This is how capitalism got built internationally, global, as a global kind of social system. So you have capitalism that's bad. And people are sometimes able to say, yeah, well, that's capitalism bad. And even your white left friends will tell you how bad capitalism is. But what they generally will not recognize is this thing that we call capitalism rests upon a foundation of colonialism. And who is colonized? Not white people. Africans are colonized. The indigenous people are colonized. And the fundamental central force that was colonized, they call it slavery, colonial slavery, that gave rise to capitalism was African people. Therefore, when you talk about actually the defeat of capitalism, it's hard to get that's why we call it parasitic capitalism. And because it is parasitic. It's parasitic because the whole thing got built sucking the blood and resources from colonized peoples around the world. That's where the whole thing comes from. And so this is the context that we're looking at. When we see this movie, it's in this context of peoples around the world because the capitalist system is in trouble. Why is it in trouble? Because the colonized peoples of the world are rising up. They're rising. They've been successfully done that in Cuba. They're moving in places like Nicaragua, even shortly after Cuba. They are in Vietnam, making this revolutionary struggle against colonialism, against white power. However it's defined, it's capitalism, it's colonialism, it's parasitism sitting on the foundation of colonized people. It's all over Africa, and of course, it's in the United States. It's all over the Caribbean. You can look at this period of history and see what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about the 50s where the US government overthrew the government of Iran, where they overthrew the government of Guatemala and committed those kinds of offenses only. I'm talking about throughout the 60s and what have you, there was this raging struggle of colonized peoples around the world. And Fred was one of them. And I was one of them, which is how I have a real close relationship to what happened with Fred. That's the primary reason I have a close relationship, because I was there. And because I know Fred, I didn't meet Fred at the time, but we knew of each other, and we knew of each other because the movement was like that. People who were engaged in revolutionary struggles around this country, we knew of each other. We knew parts of what we were doing. For example, in December 29, 1969, I snatched the mural off the city hall, off the government wall in St. Petersburg, Florida. Got prison time for that as a demonstration. And then in March 3rd, a little more than 3 months after that, the Black Panthers march into the State Assembly building in California with guns, demonstration. We were learning from each other all around the country and around the world. And there was a kind of connection that was always there. And I think it's important to say that. So it was a revolutionary moment, a revolutionary period. And Fred was an outstanding figure in that, but so was Che. That's the period that we are talking about. We're talking about the period where they killed Lumumba something like a year after Fred Hampton in Congo, because it was all connected. The United States government killed Fred here and killed Lumumba in Congo. They overthrew Nkrumah in 63 in Ghana. I'm sorry, not 63, 66 in Ghana. They were making war against this revolution all around the world and inside the United States too. That's important to understand, because the struggle that Fred died in was a struggle against a social system, colonialism, colonial capitalism that dominated the world and dominates the world now. So it's because of colonialism that we have conditions that we are confronted with right now in this country. For example, the way it really was is a point that we want to make, is because you had things like right now in Chicago, you have they've turned it into the murder mecca of the United States. And here you have the Panthers who had calmed down most of those contradictions. Now the Panthers are dead, and that's why, you know, you can see this contradiction there. It's not, they want to end it. They didn't want to end it. If they wanted to end it, the Panthers would not have been attacked the way they were attacked. They attacked the Panthers because the Panthers threatened the situation, threatened the country, threatened the social system that gave rise to the kind of violence and devastation that African people are confronted with right now. So I think that's really important to understand that. And so we have to take this issue away from the liberals who would like to paint the picture of Fred Hampton as a kind of a militant NAACP guy who really just wanted to get along with everybody. And the US government was killing him, would kill him, attack that house on West Monroe on December 4th of 1969, just because they wanted to give away free food. And the government was jealous about that. And just because he was saying that Africans and Puerto Ricans and poor whites should get along together. That wasn't it. It was a revolutionary trajectory that Hampton was on that caused the problem, that made him a threat. It was the same threat that Martin Luther King was on, independent of what he thought he was going to be doing, because he had run out of gas because of forces like the Black Panther Party, the growth of the revolutionary movement, that in order for King to stay in front of this movement, that he was incredibly influential among our people, he had to adapt politic that took it further than where he was already. He was a threat. Any African who had the kind of influence and following that King had was a threat to the colonial powers and colonial forces. Malcolm X was a threat. You may have heard something about from this whole COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. It established goals. This is just particular to the United States. It established goals. It wasn't particular to Chicago. It was particular to the United States. Guess what? They attacked the Panther office in Chicago on December 4th. 4 days later, on December 8th, they attacked the Panther office in Los Angeles, only to run into a firefight that they never could have predicted because the Panthers were prepared because of what had happened in Chicago. And four of them engaged, four members of the Black Panther Party held off hundreds of forces, military forces from Los Angeles in a 4-hour gunfight. This was powerful. So the thing was, it wasn't just Fred, and it wasn't just the Panthers there. It was an overall struggle against colonialism that came under assault by the United States government. And colonialism is from foreign and alien power. Dominates the life of your people. That's what it was when the French were dominating in Vietnam. That's what it was when the Americans tried to replace the French in Vietnam. That's what it was when the French were dominating our people in Algeria. That's what it was in various places around the world, and in the United States, there was colonialism as well. And so this foreign and alien power, this is the thing that makes it something that definitely will be fought against, because it's not like they're one of us who we're fighting against. Is somebody who's quite different. And because they're different, they treat us different. Not because they have physical differences or anything like that, because they've structured a relationship that feeds and maintains a colonial capitalist system. The whole system rests upon the foundation, this foundation of colonialism, which is why they have to fight and kill and hold people in places like Syria, and hold people in places like Afghanistan, and hold people in places like Yemen, and hold and deny people the right to live in places like Cuba and Venezuela and other things like that, because the whole colonial capitalist system rests upon the foundation of what it is they get from us. This is colonialism. And this was what came under assault. Now, Fred was particularly important. One, because at the time, Fred was the leader in Chicago. And you had Huey P. Newton, who was the founder of the Black Panther Party, who was in jail. You had, that's what the Free Huey campaign was about. Eldridge Cleaver, who was an extremely important person at the time, had been forced into exile in Algeria. Bobby Seale, who was the chairman of the Black Panther Party, was being on trial on a regular basis. And there was a discussion, even in the headquarters of the Black Panther Party, bringing Fred into Oakland to the national office to make him a part of the national leadership, as opposed to simply being a part of the Illinois Black Panther Party. And Fred was the only one of stature among the Black Panther Party at that time who could have prevented the Black Panther Party from being wiped out the way it was wiped out. Therefore, Fred was a problem. And one of the reasons they had to attack Fred Hampton, because he was not just a local guy. Fred Hampton was somebody who was a part of a revolutionary trajectory. And the Black Panther Party at that time was actually the revolutionary center in the United States and much of the world. The Black Panther Party represented that to the dismay of a lot of liberals, and many of whom, these liberals who call themselves revolutionaries and things like that. So now there's a situation that exists inside this country where the president of the United States has just been tried, and for the second time, and won this trial, where there are gun-toting thugs who have an obvious hatred of African people. These are overt colonialists who not necessarily visible, but frightening enough that the United States government had to put 30,000 troops at the Capitol in order to be able to securely get this transfer of power from the Trump regime to the Biden regime. It's that kind of threat, it's that kind of fragility in this country today that the intelligence forces of the United States government are saying that it's going to be 20 or more years before this thing gets settled. And when I say this thing, I'm talking about this thing that's happening between the colonizers. I'm talking about this sector of the colonizers who've been mobilized and given cover and given ammunition by forces like Trump. But Trump is not the person. I mean, you talk about 57%, nearly 2/3 of the white people, the colonizers who voted in this last election, voted for Trump. About the same as had voted for him in 2016. So you have this tenuous, anxious situation, and you've got this this person, Biden, who is on record in so many ways of being his hatred for African people, who created the program that's responsible for 1 out of every 8 human beings in prison in the world being an African in this country. That Biden did that. He's got a vice president who is the person who was the prosecutor, the main prosecutor for the state of California, who reveled in putting African people in prison. That was her job, that was her program. And then you've got all these people in the country who, in the United States, who are dismayed and dissatisfied about the political process in this country, who are fearful of many of whom are fearful of Trump. And then you got those who are dissatisfied and don't trust the Democratic Party either. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are facing all kinds of internal contradictions. It's an entirely unstable situation now that's ripe for revolution. And this is something that must be understood, because there are many people who think that revolution is simply somebody just going out and get guns. Guns come into play, but not like that. The whole system is experiencing destabilization, and masses of people, Africans and white people, find themselves unable to have confidence in the government itself. Under these circumstances, and especially when Africans saw these white people take the capital with ease, which destroys any notion of the invincibility of the system to protect itself. With all of this stuff happening, there's a serious threat that we'll see a struggle emerging, that the struggle within the African community is going to take on a sharp escalation. And there's a concern with this happen, where are the people going to go? And there's a need for the people to stay in the Democratic Party. There's a need for the people to accept that what we're really fighting against was the bad times back then when Hoover was there, but things are better now. There's a need to leave people with that kind of empty nonsense. And that's why the problem with the movie is it couldn't take people to the revolutionary conclusion that Fred was fighting for. But what you must be able to fight for, what you must be able to understand, because that's the thing that makes movies like this possible, regardless of what the intent of the writers, of the producers of this movie was. The fact is, the reason they could get it out there now, because the bourgeoisie itself, the colonial ruling class, has a need to try and give direction to the struggle of African people that they know is coming, and that they know that the people have become dissatisfied long time ago with the Democratic Party, and certainly don't trust Trump, and certainly feel that there's no certainty in our circumstances in the United States, given the way the colonizers themselves are engaged in fight. So here's why here's why it's become important. What was the last great memory of resistance organized resistance that people can think of? Of course, the Black Panther Party. That's why every sellout every liberal Black person that today used to be in the Black Panther Party. Used to be in the Black Panther Party, right? That's the thing that you hear all the time, because that's where the memory of the people, the last great memory of people in terms of organized resistance, the one that people know about, was the Black Panther Party. And so I want to say that the African People's Socialist Party came into existence because of what happened with the mission, rather, of completing the Black Revolution of the 60s. The revolution of the 60s. We didn't come to try to create a coalition or to do some other things to make white people like us. A revolution was in place. It was in motion. There was a Black revolution that was unfolding inside the United States that made it necessary for them to kill Fred Hampton. That made it necessary for them to put me in prison on a regular basis. I sometimes had to read the newspaper to find out where I was. They had me jailed so often during that period of time. It was a period of time where most of us, like Fred, that was shown in this movie, actually thought that we were going to die. I'm sure Afua thought she was going to die. In fact, we had a saying in Jomo, which is the precursor to the African People's Socialist Party that I authored, where we said that if you're a Black man and you live till you're 30, you're lucky. And if you live till you're 40, you're Uncle Tom. This was how prevalent death was for us all the time. We were living with it all the time. The US government was doing all kinds of stuff. They killing us, attacking us on a regular basis, jailing us en masse, and killing people all around the world. And we were seeing that, even if we didn't know all the time exactly what was happening, it was clear to us that the government was making war against us, and that life was something that was not guaranteed to any of us who were engaged in this struggle. And so, we came into existence fighting against the counterinsurgency. And I think it's important, because we said we're going to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. And what had happened murders like Malcolm, murders like King, murders like Fred Hampton. You had an African community that was becoming increasingly demoralized. People were saying stuff that every time we get a leader, the white man kill him. It became increasingly difficult to get people into revolutionary action, revolutionary organization. So part of what we did, we waged a serious campaign for a number of years, more than 5 years straight, trying to expose this counterinsurgency war that was being made against us. What was the counterinsurgency? It had so many facets. One of it was that the drugs that they put in the government, the United States government put the drugs in our community. On the one hand, they were going into Vietnam. In Vietnam, they were engaged in this thing called a Golden Triangle, where they were killing revolutionaries in Vietnam. They had counterinsurgency programs that they were using in Vietnam, just like they were using counterinsurgency program here inside the United States. And in Vietnam, one of the things that they did while killing the courageous Vietnamese people who carried for a long time the whole colonized world on its back, almost by itself. What they did in Vietnam was there's this area they call the Golden Triangle, Vietnam, Cambodia, I think in Laos perhaps, and this is where most of the opium for the world was coming from. And so while they were there, they would have Africans, and they used the draft board. The United States government used the draft board as a form of counterinsurgency, where they were drafting young African men and purposely sending young African men to go colonize, to go to Vietnam to fight other colonized people. And they were doing this, and in Vietnam, there was it was where most of the world's heroin was coming from, through the opium fields. And so you saw people in the United States, suddenly Africans becoming addicted to heroin. And then by 1979, you see that the shift of the intelligence organization in this country go to places like Nicaragua, when they start fighting a war against the people in Nicaragua who just wanted to be free, fighting against US colonialism. Just like Fred was fighting against colonialism in Chicago, throughout Illinois, and many of us were fighting against colonialism around the world. You had this situation where in Nicaragua, people were fighting against colonialism. The United States government then decided that it went into Vietnam, into Nicaragua, and to South America, where the majority of the cocaine was coming from. And so suddenly, Africans lose our taste for heroin, and we get a taste for cocaine. And of course, the US government is bringing cocaine, but it's not just cocaine. They bring the stuff into the country, and then they go to a laboratory and create a derivative that's called crack. And there's evidence, it's written, you know about it, they've done movies about it, where the CIA was the organization that spread the crack cocaine throughout our community. So at one time in the struggle, in the beginning, of course, our presence here, the whole white population, there was nothing but absolute colonial domination of our people, had no rights, no laws, anything like that. And then, of course, once a leader rises up, they kill the leader, they kill the organization, so that people are leaderless, and then they do what they can to keep the people from ever rising up again or even producing another leader. And so in this instance, they attack the leaders of our revolution, and then they salt the earth by putting cocaine, by putting crack in our communities, so that the people are now, the masses of our people are now locked into a stupor, or put in this place where they can't think more than 12 minutes ahead at a time, because they got to get another hit. And of course, you can't make a revolution unless you are far-seeing, unless you can plan ahead. And if you got a whole community on crack cocaine, where every 12 minutes they got to get a hit, then revolutionary likelihood become less something to be concerned about. And then, of course, what they've done, and this is something I talked about, how 4 days after the raid on Hamptons and the Black Panther Party on West Monroe Street, they attacked 40th and Central in LA, the Panther Party there. And they used in LA this thing that they created especially for us. It was called a SWAT team. This is the birth of the SWAT team, special military organizations designed just to crush the African revolution, to crush the struggle against colonialism. They want the right to be able to humiliate and steal our resources on a regular basis without any kind of meaningful response from us. And when you get somebody like Fred Hampton, who responds in an extraordinarily meaningful way, who's charismatic, can mobilize and organize masses of African people, such as Hampton did. This is what makes him a threat. Just like it made Malcolm a threat, just like it made Nkrumah a threat, just like it made Lumumba a threat, just like it made Guevara a threat, just like it made the entire revolutionary movement that was unfolding throughout the world. And so this government was involved in a big thing, and you must understand that. It wasn't because they thought Fred's success in Chicago was going to be able to provide the FBI agent's white daughter for a Black man. It was because it's an anti-colonial struggle that we're involved in, and they saw the success. The crisis of this government was influenced and informed by the resistance of revolutionary colonized people around the world, in Vietnam, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in places in Africa, all over Africa, Angola, Mozambique, various other places like that, South Africa. And in the United States, we had the same thing going on. We had the Mexican National Liberation Movement unfolding. Africans in Puerto Rico engaged in heavy struggle. That was a serious crisis. That's what they were fighting against. That's the story that they don't tell. So when they come for Fred, they're coming for that. But our party was formed in order to defeat the counterinsurgency that killed Fred, that killed Malcolm, that overthrew Nkrumah, that murdered Lumumba, that butchered, that murdered Che Guevara. It was, our movement was one that was designed to fight that, to destroy this counterinsurgency. And so we created organizations to do that. And this is how I came to know Akua and Jerry in Chicago. And where we went into Chicago and organized in Chicago and held the first national People's Democratic Uhuru Movement meeting in Chicago. And we did this in Chicago precisely because it was where Fred was murdered. And we said it. And we did it on the day we did it, April 6th, because that's the day people talk about King's death on April 4th, but they don't talk about the fact that little Bobby Hutton was murdered, the Black Panther was murdered in Oakland, California by the police on April 6th. It's the same process of wiping out the revolution that killed Fred that's happening in various places around the world inside the United States. And we went into Chicago and we organized the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement with the objective of defeating the counterinsurgency that killed Fred. And we used Fred's words that you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. We said Fred is back in that regard. And Akua became the first president of the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, and Fred Jr. Became the president, the local president there in Chicago. And Akua, because we wanted the world to know Fred, because the slander and the kinds of things they've done even in Chicago. There are people, we said there are people who love Fred Hampton all around the world, and that's how the party, Akua was a member of the party, and we took her to London so that she got a chance to meet with Africans every place and say, this is Fred Hampton's widow. And to Africa, this is Fred Hampton's widow, etc. Because we refuse to let the revolution die. And we refuse to let it die despite all of the efforts that the government made to crush our revolutionary movement and to destroy the anti-colonial struggle that we're involved in. That's why we were there. I want to tell you this, I'm going to shut up. But even when you look at Hoover, what you need to understand, there was a man whose name was William Sullivan. He is the one who wrote the COINTELPRO program to destroy Black people. Sullivan played a role in murdering Fred. Sullivan played a role in getting William O'Neill to do his bidding. Sullivan played a role in murdering Malcolm X and other forces like this. William Sullivan, who was an FBI agent. And Sullivan was so successful in doing what he did that they gave him another job. And they sent Sullivan to Southeast Asia, where he was supposed to get involved in fighting a so-called war against drugs. And so he went into Southeast Asia and he created something called ODALE. And ODALE, the acronym of which is what was it called? No, he didn't create it. They put him in charge of Odell because of the success that he had had in killing Fred and killing Africans and other revolutionaries throughout the United States. So it was called the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, Odell. And this was, he did such a good job, they put him in charge of it. And this was headed by another CIA agent at the time. And Odell is the organization that became the Drug Enforcement Administration. And it was involved in moving the drugs from South America and other places into the United States and to be used against our people. The United States government is a filthy colonial power. It's a settler colony, a filthy colonial power. It has no redeeming qualities. And yes, they would kill Fred, they would kill all of us, and they have been killing all of us for a long time. So I wanted to tell you that. And then we built the International People's Democratic Movement to fight against this colonial, this counterinsurgency. That was the basis for its coming into existence. And that was the reason that Akur became his first president. Chicago was the place where the national organization was created, because 5 years earlier, we had created the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in Oakland, California. And the objective has always been to defeat the counterinsurgency. The objective has always been to bring the African masses back into political life subsequent to the murders and jailings that they had done all around this country. And I have not even touched upon the kind of mayhem and murder that they have imposed on us. Some have become so common now that we don't even pay attention to what it is that they do. But they've created horrible things. They locked up housing projects and turned them into something like near concentration camps. Their objective was to make sure that the revolution didn't rise. One of the most important objectives of the counterinsurgency program is resource and population control. That's why you had the barbed wire fences and things like that around housing projects. That's why even with the so-called desegregation program, they got fences and things like that, and police on school campuses where you go to school with white people. So it was a part of a struggle against a war against the Black Revolution of the 60s that killed Fred Hampton. And the objective is to build that revolutionary movement again. And that's what the African People's Socialist Party has always been about. And because we were there, we were able to build. After Fred was killed, we were able to build NPDOM. We were able to build it in Chicago. And to quote Fred as saying, you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. Revolution lives. And it lives in the African People's Socialist Party. And we were able to be there when they killed Huey P. Newton. We were there. And one of the reasons that the Black Revolution of the 60s did not get completely wiped out in terms of the consciousness of the people, the slander that was imposed on us, is because we were there. Because the very day, the next morning, after Huey was killed, the big newspapers had headlines from Prime Minister to bum. And they were going to reduce Huey P. Newton to some gangster type character and suggest that's why they killed him, not because he was a revolutionary force in the 1960s. And we would not allow them to do it. We made a decision, a conscious decision, that by the time Huey P. Newton is buried, we will have resurrected Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party, and did it. And many of the people who were able to come out, who used to be Panthers and suddenly were able to now become Panthers again, were able to do it because the African People's Socialist Party was on the ground. We are the ones who organized even the person who, the funeral guy who was responsible for the funeral and did what was necessary to take care of Frederica Huey's wife, his widow. This is the party of the revolution. And so Fred was killed, but the revolution wasn't killed. And we anticipate all these murder and mayhem that's imposed on us all the time that's happening to us right now. So I just wanted to say that. And I also want to let you know that February 21st, speaking to the whole issue of martyrs, speaking to the whole issue of counterinsurgency, speaking to the relationship that the murder of Malcolm King and Fred Hampton and the others had to each other. It wasn't just a bunch of incidents. You keep going. And every year we have these programs. We remember Malcolm. Then we have another program. Sometimes we remember Fred. We have a program. We remember Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. The thing is that they died as a part of a single process of counterinsurgency that was being waged against us. And you must know and understand that, because the revolution has not been completed, because Fred was not fighting to be loved by liberals or even to be respected by them. Fred was fighting for the liberation of our people. He was an anti-colonialist revolutionary. That's what we must understand. And this was the war, again, that was made against our revolution. And this was just a small contribution, I hope, plays a role in clarifying some of this. So February 21st, which is the date, anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, at our party's first Congress in 1981 in Oakland, California, we passed a resolution characterizing February 21st, this day, as African Martyrs Day, because they killed Fred, they killed Malcolm, they killed Martin, they killed all these people to set examples that would frighten us so that we won't fight. They kill us, they demoralize, they make us too frightened to fight. And what we are saying is we hold up these martyrs, not as they would have us hold them up, as somebody who represent the futility of fighting against white power. We hold them up and give them this powerful martyrdom, a recognition of martyrdom, not just somebody who's dead, but martyrdom. They died in the struggle for our people, and that there's nothing more glorious that an African, a colonized person can do other than kill the colonizer. There's nothing that we can do that's more glorious in dying for the liberation of our people. And then Fred understood that. That's why you hear him talking about the I'm die. What? Half the people. And that's why Hewitt would even write books to die for the people and things like that, because we live close to death. If you're talking about revolutionary, and I'm saying that we cannot allow them to terrorize us by killing a leader. And so the leader must give significance to the revolution, not to white power. So we don't say we ain't gonna fight because they killed Fred. We say because they killed Fred, we take that example of martyrdom as one that all of us should look up to. And so go to apspuhuru.org, apspuhuru.org. Get information on African Martyrs Day. Learn about African Martyrs Day and hold celebrations wherever you are located in the world, where you don't have to just hold up Malcolm, or you don't have to just hold up Fred, but hold up all those who have been martyred in our struggle throughout the world. So, as I said, February 21st is the day of the African martyr, apspuhuru.org. Live like Fred, fight like